Welcome back to Progressively Incorrect, a podcast about teaching to the test and the testing effect. I am your host, Dr. Zach Groeschel, and I have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Marcy Stein. Professor Emeritus and lead author of Direct Instruction Mathematics is here to talk to us about Project Follow-Through and Zig Engelmann's Direct Instruction programs. This is a fantastic episode that had me thinking about the importance of using well-designed instructional materials and also questioning the prevailing view in education that teachers should be instructional designers who plan lessons from scratch. Dr. Stein also goes into some of the common myths and misconceptions that people have around direct instruction, including that it is nothing but lecturing and the belief that scripted lessons take away the excitement of teaching. Dr. Stein is one of the OGs of direct instruction, and I was extremely grateful to be able to ask her all of my burning questions about her area of expertise. Please hit subscribe, give Progressively Incorrect a 5-star rating, and I'll see you on the other side. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am here with Marcy Stein, a fabulous professor in my area that has, I think, a lot to say today about one of my favorite topics, which is direct instruction. How are you doing, Marcy?
I'm well, thanks, Zach.
How about we start off by, for people who don't know you and your work, maybe introducing yourself and what you do.
Okay, I am right now. I'm a professor emeritus from the University of Washington, Tacoma. What's relevant to this podcast is that I got my master's degree at University of Oregon with the direct instruction people. And then after I received my master's degree there, I worked in Project Follow-Through, which we're going to talk about, for 6 years, and actually had my own Project Follow-Through model for a little while in the when I moved to Seattle. And then I am one of the founding faculty members of the University of Washington Tacoma's education program, now School of Education. So I started that program with 2 other people in 1992, and it's still going strong. So that's kind of about me.
Excellent. And my first interaction with you, I think it was so memorable. I was like, I had to have you on the show because you actually gave like a presentation, I believe during your sabbatical, during my teacher prep program. And this presentation kind of shocked me into reality because up till then, we've been told a lot of, learning should be done through inquiry, discovery. That reading is something that maybe comes naturally, that the math is something that we should allow students to maybe explore for a long amounts of time. And you come in and you sort of give this fantastic presentation about Project Follow-Through. Can you describe what Project Follow-Through is and why it's important even today in 2023 we should know about it?
Well, I'd be happy to, and I do think people should know about it in 2023. And there's some good resources. I'm going to give you obviously the short version, but here, and then there's some really great resources to learn more about it, and then what's happened since Project Follow-Through. In 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and that became the sort of the baseline, the precursor to kind of looking at various aspects of how to alleviate, how to address issues of poverty. And one aspect of that is addressing differences in educational achievement between students who are in poverty and students who are not. So after the Civil Rights Act, there was further legislation that yielded Title I. It started Title I, and it actually started Head Start. Follow-through was an extension of Head Start. In Head Start, communities that were eligible for funding got the funding. It was a lot of it was focused on a social program mostly. I mean, you made sure kids were, fed well and saw doctors and dentists and actually when I was a kid, I volunteered in one of the first Head Start programs in my community, which I realized later, given that I worked for Follow-Through. So Follow-Through didn't have the same amount of money and couldn't fund all the communities. So what they decided to do was to do a study. They funded major models in education, major approaches to education. They contacted people, and those approaches to education connected with communities. Communities around the United States selected their approach. The community decided what approach they wanted to engage with. And our follow-through program, the direct instruction model and follow-through, engaged with all kinds of communities in poverty. I went to Williamsburg County, South Carolina, and consulted with 5 schools there. And at one time, Williamsburg County was the lowest on the poverty scale. I mean, they ranked the lowest according to the U.S. Census. And I also went to Flint, Michigan, and consulted in 2 schools in an urban setting. There were sites and I went to a little town in Arkansas called Flippin, Arkansas, and it was kind of a poor white community. And each of the major models implemented in the schools, there needed to be at least 3 schools. What's important about follow through, there were 9 major models finally evaluated. It cost close to, when it was over $1 billion. It involved over 100,000 kids in 170 economically challenged communities. I mean, it was huge, and it was evaluated at the end of 10 years. And what was important is that every follow-through school that participated had a non-follow-through matched school in the same community. So they had a comparison group within the same community doing what was being done in that community outside of follow through. At the end of 1977, when the report came out, the direct instruction model just outperformed every other model. I mean, hands down, they outperformed models in basic skills. They outperformed models in what they called cognitive tests. And they outperformed the models, and this is significant, in how kids felt about themselves. They had some affective measures, and the kids in the direct instruction model outperformed all of the other kids in the affective domain, affective measures. It's significant. It was a demonstration that you could work with kids in poverty, and you could get those kids with really well-designed instruction and good teacher prep and good teacher training. You could, in fact, ensure that those kids had a chance to compete with their middle-class peers. And it was a great demonstration, and it hasn't really been paid much attention to over the years.
And you know what I really like about it too is, like, I think of it like a horse race type of model, right? Where a lot of times we can excuse away, I guess, some sort of results from other studies because maybe the researcher themselves may have had a lot more invested in their model, where the other one they kind of don't pay as close attention to. So you get like this kind of placebo effect where this was the good one and this was the kind of poorly implemented one, and then we can't really learn from this, where this was almost like a competition between different researchers who really were into their type of instruction.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was, I mean, there are people who say that it wasn't a competition, who want to kind of downplay that, but it really was. And all the measures were the same, and they were agreed upon, and these were all kids in poverty. And they really thought, the direct instruction people, the people who designed the model, of course, really thought this was going to be significant, that, this wasn't a little study with 20 kids or 30 kids or a couple schools. I mean, it involved 100,000 students over and looked at progress at the end of outcomes at the end of 3rd grade. And it's amazing that it's then where it turned into politics, then where the attention paid to the science wasn't quite there. People didn't like the fact that the direct instruction model outperformed the other models. It just didn't sit well with them. In fact, I was sitting on the plane with Wes Becker, who was the co-director of the follow-through model, professor at University of Oregon, and he came back from a preliminary discussion of the outcomes. And he told me that when they were discussing the outcomes on the affective measures and how the direct instruction kids outperformed the other kids on how well they felt about their schooling and what they were doing in school, the big response was, oh, well, there must be something wrong with those measures. That was the response. Oh, there must be something wrong with the measures. How this can't be. The kids who are in these direct instruction programs can't possibly feel better than the kids that are in these student-centered programs. It just doesn't make sense to them. And yet, and it made complete sense to us because kids in a direct instruction model, which is a mastery model, knew exactly what they were learning, and they knew when they knew it, and they got it, and it was all about the success. It was all about that. That's what makes you feel good about your work in school, is that you are successful. And those kids were successful.
Interesting. And a lot of people will tell me without evidence, just kind of anecdotally, that's why direct instruction, yeah, sure, it works. I'll admit that, right? They might say, but that basically there's a side effect, I guess. That's even a Yang Zhao thing. I think the side effects of direct instruction, which haven't been shown, which would be that essentially it kind of kills the love of learning, or it kills creativity. We're going to talk about, myths and misconceptions in a bit, but, so I'll table that. But the other measure that was really interesting was they didn't just test basic skills, which is, a lot of people say direct instruction, sure, it teaches you how to take a test. It doesn't teach you that kind of problem solving ability. And what I'm hearing is that the direct instruction program of Zig Engelmann did also outperform those which were supposed to be made for improving students' problem solving skills.
Yeah, now this was a long time ago. This was in the 70s. So the measures that they had then, they characterized into 3 categories, and one was basic skills, and one was sort of cognitive skills. So they tested kids on reading comprehend. It was the Metropolitan Achievement Test, the old-fashioned achievement test. Math concepts, math problem solving, comprehension. Now, I think I listed in some resources for you. There was a great article that Wes Becker wrote for Harvard Educational Review, where it was very clear that our kids did well on decoding, because we know how to teach decoding, and it was systematic, and man, hands down, nobody came close. But we were a little bit lower than we should have been on reading comprehension, and that's where the language piece and the background knowledge piece. So that's when everybody started talking about background knowledge, because those tests, the test of comprehension, as we all know, have to do with background knowledge, have to do with what you know before you sit down to take one of those tests. So the kids could decode, and then Wes talks about what needs to happen then, like what needs to happen once kids learn how to decode in terms of language and reading and background knowledge. And that was all the research that was done, from the Center for the Study of Reading, all about background knowledge and schema theory and all that. Well, yeah, it really, now, despite the fact that the kids scored at about the 40th percentile instead of the 50th, you were looking at the 50th for the 50th percentile, because that's where your middle class kids scored. They still outperformed other kids. No one outperformed the direct instruction model. So they still outperformed kids on those cognitive measures.
Right. And now if listeners have gotten this far, they're probably like, well, I want to know more about this direct instruction program, or the programs that are out there. And so you're a huge proponent of what we can call Engelmann's direct instruction with a capital D and a capital I. Can you describe the design elements of a capital D, capital I program, and maybe how these overlap or not with the strategies of lowercase direct instruction?
Yeah, it's a lot of people know about sort of little di, and they think they can take a program and they can turn it into a capital D, capital I program, which is very hard to do. When I do a talk on the analysis of direct instruction, I divide it into 3 and sometimes 4 sections, depending on the audience. And the 3 sections are this. There's the organization. This is sort of an analysis of any instruction. There's sort of organization and management. How's the classroom run? How much time is spent in teacher-directed instruction? How much time is spent in student-centered instruction? How are kids' progress? How is progress being measured? How are teachers? Is there some quality control? Is there some coaching aspect to the instruction? That all falls under sort of organization and management. Then the second is just instructional design. I'm going to kind of hold off on talking. I'm going to talk about that last. The third aspect of instruction is instructional delivery. So that's your interaction with students. Instructional delivery has to do with, how do you correct errors? Do you bring kids to mastery? Again, what does your interaction style look like with kids? In my opinion, what happens is people, little DI does a good job of organization and management. They do a good job of talking about instructional delivery. How do you model? How do you prompt? How do you do all those things? Do you have a checklist? I mean, I was looking at Rosenshine's, descriptions, 5 descriptions of direct instruction. But what makes Engelmann's DI, the capital DI, extremely different from everything else is that instructional design. And there's 6. It's really hard to boil down instructional design. I mean, we have it in sort of some textbooks. We have 6 aspects, and it's the first 2 that most people don't understand. So I'll talk to you briefly about the rest of them, but the first 2 are the really critical pieces. When an instructional designer sits down to design some content, some instruction, to design a program, they look at they really look for what has been called by many people big ideas. They look for the concepts, the principles, the knowledge, and then they look at how to organize those big ideas. And the real key to designing efficient, effective instruction is looking at the relationships between that knowledge, all of those knowledge pieces. They look at sameness and difference. They don't design an addition strategy without looking at what's similar or different from the subtraction, multiplication, and division strategies. Why would you don't design these strategies in isolation. You design them by analyzing the world and figuring out how best you can teach certain things. They do this in science. They do it in all language. And that's the hard part. And that's the brilliance of Engelmann, that he would sit down, choose some content, do an analysis that says, wow, is this worth teaching? How efficiently can I teach it? And when I teach it, how can what I teach lead to greater knowledge in related domains or related tasks or related knowledge? Then they design what they call strategies. People think, and we're going to talk about this later, a myth, people think that because direct instruction is scripted, because if you watch a direct instruction lesson, you see group responses, unison responses, they think of it as rote instruction, and yet there's nothing in a direct instruction program that's taught by rote that can be taught by anything else. You do have to memorize that this squiggle, this letter makes this sound. You do have to understand that this squiggle is a 4 and what 4 represents. That requires some memorization. But everything else is taught using what in our lingo is a strategy. And how do you test whether it's a good strategy? How generalizable is it to other strategies? And what's the test of a good strategy? And the test really has to do with how generalizable it is. So the first thing they do is they say, what are the big ideas? What are we going to do in any given, say, academic year in math? Or what are we going to do in reading? Or what are we going to teach? Then they look at relationships in content and principles and strategies. Then they design the strategy and field test it. And then after that, it looks like other things. After they have the strategy, then they do a task analysis. Then they identify the prerequisite skills that are necessary. Then they design a sequence of instruction. But the first 2 are things that are so not obvious. You can't see them when you watch a direct instruction lesson. You can't even see them when you pick up the program materials because they're so embedded in there. You have to look at how these programs are constructed with, and they use something called track sequencing. So here are all the things that we teach. Here's how they progress over the year. Here's how they interface with the other things that they teach. Here's when the prerequisites are taught. I am not an instructional designer. I know about instructional design, but I am not an instructional designer. And I think it's a very hard thing to do. That's how it's different from little DI. People want to script anything, and people don't understand that the script is really irrelevant. The script is you can script really ineffective instruction. You can use unison responding with really, really that, bad instruction that leads kids down wrong paths. You can use all those instructional delivery techniques. You can even do the organization and management stuff. You can have a lot of teacher-directed instruction. But if what you're teaching is not well designed, kids will not learn. That's the critical difference between big DI and little DI. It's the design, and you have to really search hard to kind of learn about that design. Although let me tell you, two places where you can learn about the design, and they're very expensive and it's really hard, but there's a direct instruction reading book and there's a direct instruction mathematics book, and they are not how to teach direct instruction. They are how to design instruction or modify instruction. So people think they take a class in direct instruction using one of those textbooks. I used to teach out of those textbooks. You don't learn how to be a good DI teacher from reading those books. What you learn is what underlies all of those instructional strategies and what you need to do to ensure that your kids can learn them.
Perfect. And I mean, and I've gone down this road a little bit. I've actually read a book that I'm waving it in the screen for people that are listening, called Direct Instruction Mathematics, which you wrote. I know Diane Kinder from the university, and I also know Doug Carnine from University of Oregon, but also just like a very prominent educationalist. And you wrote this book, and that's exactly right. It's like, for someone who really wants to know what's underneath, what underlies a really well sequenced direct instruction program, this will tell you for math. I think it's really cool for kind of instructional design nerds and stuff.
It's a cookbook. I mean, it really is a cookbook. I mean, and what we did in that book was we took the strategies the instructional designers designed for their instructional programs, their commercial programs, and we pulled out the essence of some of those strategies so that you wouldn't have to redesign the strategy. But if you want to teach this strategy, here's a step-by-step way of doing it. And it's hard to do. It's hard to add. I mean, it's not a quick and dirty because there's so much involved with writing a program, but it is a cookbook, and it does. Yeah, you want to teach this strategy? Here are the prerequisites. Make sure the kids know the prerequisites, and if they know them, fine. And I want to say one more thing about instructional design. The designers design instruction with just a naive learner, not a low-performing learner, someone who doesn't already know stuff. If you don't know how to do this, what would it take to teach you this? So they design instruction independent of the learner. Then what happens is you, the teacher, you have to figure out, well, the kids already know these prerequisite skills. I can go faster. I can skip that. Or no, I have to back up. Or no, there's some language demands that the kids that I'm teaching don't know, and I have to make sure that I don't skip those. The adjustment to the instruction comes after the instruction is designed, and then you accommodate your kids. Are they high-performing kids? And our definition of a high-performing kid is a kid who needs far fewer repetitions. There's some kids you can tell them once and they've got it, and there's some kids who are going to need 300 times. And you have to figure out who those kids are, but the instructional strategies don't change, right? How you teach them changes, how you accommodate your learners, right? That you know your learner changes, but not the quintessential instructional strategy. They've designed that for a reason, and those strategies lead into the other learning that's going to happen, right? The other strategies.
Perfect. And, I've been trying to hold back on this myths and misconceptions part because there's been so many that are coming to mind. Maybe we'll just kind of, do rapid fire between some of them. But yeah, here's my next question. Even with all the evidence that's accumulated for direct instruction, which, by the way, I think it's Stockard and colleagues 2018 is a very recent meta-analysis that puts it all together.
And they wrote a book.
Oh, yeah.
So they wrote a book called All Students Can Succeed, and that is 50 years of research on direct instruction.
Right. So it's not something that exists. That's the first myth we'll put away, that only exists in the 60s. We have more recent evidence for this. But even despite that, there seems to be a lot of resistance to it. Could you maybe address why you think that is, and maybe some of those misconceptions and myths around direct instruction.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, there's lots of aspects to it. The first misconception that I think is just prominent is that that direct instruction is rote instruction. I mean, people they see it being delivered, they see unison responding, they see, and they say, oh, this is just pounding into kids. And it doesn't actually allow kids to apply or think further. And it's such a misconception. What you see when you see a direct instruction lesson is you usually see the early parts of teaching a strategy. You see teaching prerequisite skills. You see putting those skills together into a sequence of steps, right? That this is how you apply and integrate all those prerequisite skills that I just taught you. But you don't see the part where the teacher releases responsibility to the student. And that always happens. There is always a sequence of instructional procedures whereby it starts out very highly structured, and then the teacher gradually, right, releases that responsibility to the students, asks some questions, prompts less, models less. But the really interesting thing about those instructional procedures is that they're very systematic. It's a very structured. In fact, in the math book, you'll see here's a highly structured format, and then here's a less structured format where only key questions are asked. Not all of the questions, just key questions. And then there's something called guided practice. And when we do guided practice, that means we're watching students as they engage with the strategy. And we're going to catch that. We're going to catch something, and then it goes to independent. We never send kids off to do independent work that we haven't set them already up to do. So there is there's a continuum of support that a teacher provides for students where they're gradually, but when you see a lesson, you're always seeing the early stages of that. You're seeing, I'm reducing responsibility. I'm reducing my prompting. I'm giving kids more responsibility, but I'm always teaching them something new. There will always be a teacher directed part, and it will always be for the newer strategies, for the next steps, for the, where this is going. So that's where those tracks come in. You may be one place in a track in the very beginning where you're introducing a strategy, or you're even teaching the prerequisites, but in another track, you're into guided practice and you're just watching kids do something. But a lesson in direct instruction is made up of a bunch of different skills. It's rarely do we teach one thing at a time. We teach several things that don't compete with each other, but we're always teaching something. And there's an amazing amount of practice and review. And then that amount of practice and reviews depends on the student performance. Do the students need it? Do they not need it? As I'm teaching, do I need to go back to if I'm watching guided practice and the kids are making some mistakes, I'm going to go back to a less structured format and a less structured script. And I'm going to add some things to see if I can get them to mastery. And then I'm going to release that again. And practice. I saw now recently that there's a new term. We used to use the term cumulative introduction and review. Nothing is ever lost in a direct instruction program. You teach something and then you integrate it with something else and you integrate it with something else. Well, now it's called interleaving. I guess it's like, well, that's kind of the same thing that Engelmann did in the 60s. Nothing ever dies. You don't teach all the letter sound correspondences to kids and then teach them how to sound out words. You teach a few letter sound correspondences. You teach segmenting and you teach blending. You teach all those phonemic awareness skills. Then you introduce those things into words, and then those words come into text, but you don't wait. Then you add more letter sound correspondences and you practice more, and then you integrate those into words, and then before there's and the kids practice them in isolation in words before they ever see them in text and before they ever read them independently. So it is an interleaving, it is a cumulative introduction and review, and it occurs in every single direct instruction program.
Yeah, wow. And then you kind of addressed it, but that's another myth, kind of like a related myth, which would be that direct instruction doesn't sort of release the students to be independent, that they will not become independent learners because they are so dependent on, I guess, nonstop lecturing or something.
Oh, and oh, that's another one. It's not lecturing, of course, right? Because there are more interactions between the teacher and the students in a direct instruction lesson than there often are in any other kind of approach to teaching. It's not a lecture. It is totally interactive. And it's I'm gonna say some stuff maybe early in the strategy. I'm gonna ask you. In fact, I'm gonna ask you, did you hear me? I might ask you just to repeat what I said because I just want to know that you can give me back what I said. Did you hear me that? Did that? Okay, now I'm gonna advance those questions and they're gonna become more sophisticated. But there's a huge amount of interaction, and this is really important to say about unison responding. People think that this unison responding, this rote, this kids are all saying it together. Well, that's an efficient use of time. Instead of asking kids one at a time, right? Here's this question, this question, this question. I'm going to get interaction from my kids. I'm going to get some responses from my kids. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some individual terms. And the individual terms that I ask, man, it is your first order of assessment. I think I taught you well. I think I taught you this and that you've got it. Now I'm going to ask, not everybody. I'm going to be very clear about whom I'm asking. If I have a small group of kids, but I know that there's some kids that they're getting it faster than other kids, I'm going to ask those lower performing kids because if they've got it, I can ensure that everybody else has it. I'm going to be very strategic about but asking a question of a kid in a group or in a whole class, that's an assessment. That tells me whether or not I'm doing what I think I'm doing. And that leads into something that is absolutely critical, and that is direct instruction as a mastery model. You don't move on until kids master it. You figure out who has it and who doesn't have it, and you teach it. There's the kids, they absolutely are involved in the lessons. It's not rote. And add the success part. Kids hate it, it's boring. Teachers hate it, it's boring. Well, I got to tell you, when I was teaching direct instruction, what I was really happy about, because I'm not an instructional designer, I was really happy that I had the content there and all my attention went to my kids. I don't have to think about what examples to use. I don't have to think. I have to see if I can predict errors. Okay, where's the hard part? How are the hard parts coming? So there's a whole set of teaching skills that where the direct instruction strategies make it so much easier for me to make sure that my kids have those skills, right? I mean, have the learn what I'm trying to teach them. And it's like knowing how to predict, knowing how to correct, knowing how to it's called something we call a delayed test. So I've got it, I've corrected an error. We do some other stuff. I go back to it and see if the kid still has it. The delayed test in a correction procedure is everything. It's everything. I think I've corrected it. You have it now, but really it was pretty immediate. You didn't have to remember it for very long. So now I want to go to something else and come back to it and see if you still have it. I want to know, it's all about my teaching behaviors, my teaching skills all have to do with bringing kids to mastery on what it is that they design. And I never found it boring because the kids always got me thinking. You couldn't not think while you were teaching. You had to predict who has it, who doesn't have it. Did they get that? Can they do this? Can I go faster? Do I have to slow up? Do I need to review something else? How do I keep them motivated with all the repetitions that they need? And that's a whole nother ballgame, but it's really not hard to do, especially the younger kids. It's really easy to kind of tease them about what's next and what can be next and how hard this is. And I use a little race, a teacher versus student game with little kids, and they get very excited about it. And if you as a teacher think it's important, they think it's important. With older kids who have failed, when you're talking about students who are remedial students, you have to demonstrate that you can deliver. Everybody's told them somebody was going to teach them to read. Right. And now they got to 7th grade or 8th grade, or they're juniors in high school and they can't read. And you're going to come in and say, no, I'm going to teach you how to read now. You better have the program and the skills and the knowledge to be able to show them, no, I really am. And look, you're getting better. And you have to put that progress in front of them. Otherwise, they don't see it because they failed for so long. So motivation, yeah, but give me a program that I don't have to invent, that I don't have to figure out. Give me some really good strategies to teach kids that will make them smarter, right? Get I'm smarter, and then sent me loose teaching, because I don't find that boring at all.
Yeah, I think it's a weird thing about teaching that a lot of teachers are really weighed down by workload, and they'll say it. There's just too much. They're throwing things at me all the time. But some of those easy wins, with being able to partner with your curriculum materials, being able to not figure out what you're teaching, but figuring out how is best to teach it, like, that's just not accepted in some corners and it is in others. I don't know. Like, yeah.
And ironically, to my knowledge, and I know a fair amount about teacher preparation, no one teaches instructional design to teachers. You can teach about it, like we do, sort of about it. So look at the sequence of examples. If you there's a sequencing rule in instructional design. Don't teach two things that are likely to confuse kids. Don't teach them in proximity with one another. Direct instruction programs don't teach the letter sound correspondences of B and D in close proximity. They teach one, and then later on they teach the other one, and they can figure out ways to get kids to read with a really good sequence. Well, why would a teacher have to figure that out? And how does a teacher know that if they didn't take it at an instructional design class? So there's this notion that anybody can design instruction. There's this notion that you can design, and this is an Anita Archer quote. I think Anita Archer is the one who kind of said, hey, the idea that separating the idea of instruction from activities. You can design a lot of activities, but instruction is something different. So absolutely. Instruction and activities are not the same thing. So I don't know. And I should say this, if a teacher who's creating his or her own instructional programs is successful, if the kids are all doing everything that they should be doing, well, then you have no argument. I mean, you really want to look at kid data. But if you're in a situation where you have kids that are coming up from behind, walking in the door, knowing that there's some things that have to be addressed if they're going to catch up to their especially kids in poverty, right, to their middle class peers, and you don't have time to waste. You can't experiment with those kids if, in fact, there's some evidence to suggest that this is going to get them there. In fact, I think I don't know if it's Paul Kirshner said this or not, but in your interview with him, it's kind of arrogant. So it's really a hard one. And I think teachers have been sort of misled in their teacher prep programs about sort of the value of well-designed instruction.
And and here's another myth that I think this is new after Emily Hanford's Sold a Story podcast, which I'm a huge fan of.
Me too.
Here's the new one. I think it's increasingly accepted that maybe phonics is something that you learn by explicit direct instruction. Your teacher needs to show you because these are arbitrary symbols. So right. But when it comes to math, and I heard this even in my program, that's a whole different ballgame. We need them to think like mathematicians. We need to set big real world projects so that they can sort of replicate the discovery processes of experts. I mean, have you heard this one too?
Oh yeah, and it makes me a little crazy. And you know that, again, your interview with Paul Kirshner, the cognitive psychologists are not there at all. Not there at all. The only time that you can sort of discover and learn is if you have a huge amount of knowledge, that you become the expert and you can apply that knowledge to a novel situation. But little kids in math, it makes me totally a little crazy about this, because math is so systematic. And you can teach math really well, and you can teach relationships, and you can teach kids to understand concepts if the instruction is designed well. And I've taught so many math courses. I mean, I think I started teaching a math course to teachers when I was still in my master's program, my very first class. And I've used those strategies that are in the direct instruction mathematics book. And there's never been one class that I've ever taught where, and these are graduate classes, okay, not undergraduate, where teachers sitting in my classroom haven't said, oh, is that how that works? To an elementary strategy, because teachers haven't been taught. So it's a well-supported notion that teachers don't feel comfortable teaching math, yet somehow they think that letting kids, well, I'll give you a real good example about current math stuff. Why would you teach a student who is not very successful in math 5 different ways to solve a problem? When what you really want is you want to teach those kids one way to solve the problem that will in fact be related to other kinds of problems. So if a student comes up with a solution and they say, look, I solved the problem and I got the right answer, the real critical piece is, and will that strategy that the kid used, will that in fact help him or her solve the next related problem or the next related problem? Let me give you a really good math example about generalization and it's fractions. I mean, fractions, there's so many kids who just don't understand fractions. And in direct instruction, fractions got introduced, I think, in the old programs. I think they were in first grade, at the very latest second grade. And this embodies instructional design. Kids don't have problems drawing a picture of 3/4. Pizza, pie, cookie, they draw a picture of 3/4. But you ask kids, older kids, to draw a picture of 5/4, and they can't do it. And the reason they can't do it is that in kindergarten, they were introduced to fractions with a 1 on top. Okay, 1/2 and 1/3 and 1/4. And then in primary grades, they were introduced to proper fractions with 2/3 and 3/4. And they were all introduced to, every time they were introduced to fractions, they were introduced to the pizza or the pie or the cookie, and we're going to divide it up. Well, the direct instruction designers for fractions instruction said, well, if we're going to teach students the concept of fractions, we need to teach them a strategy that allows them to understand both proper and improper fractions. Right? Not one strategy for proper fractions, turn around, oh no, forget that, now there's improper fractions. And it was a really simple fix. When we introduced kids to fractions, they put more than one unit in front of them, more than, say, one circle, more than one cookie, more than one pizza, but you had multiple, probably about 3 right there. And they taught the kids to, quote, decode a fraction. Bottom number tells you how many parts in each group, top number tells you how many parts to shade or color or that you have. So they'd say, okay, what's the bottom number? It's a 4. Well, you have to make 4. That means 4 parts in this one, 4 parts in this one, 4 parts in this one. Top number tells you how many to shade. 3/4. Oh, color in 1, 2, 3. Here's a picture of 3/4. Go to 5/4. Bottom number tells you how many parts in each group. 4, 4, 4. Top. Now you're going to shade. How many parts do you color? Do you shade? Do you have? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you have a picture of 5/4. Now you have the concept that a fraction can be more than one whole group or less than one whole group. Now you introduce kids to fractions from the very beginning with a generalizable strategy that allows them to understand the real nuances of what fractions are, and you go from there. And by the way, we do introduce kids with bottom number and top number. Later, we talk about numerator and denominator because there's another instructional design rule that says you don't introduce new vocabulary and a new concept at the same time. If you can introduce a concept that has very clear language that the kids can understand, and then put a label on that concept, the kids are going to learn that better. So we don't say numerator and denominator until the kids understand the concept of, what does the bottom number represent? What is the top number? That's instructional design. That fraction stuff is amazing. And it's the biggest chapter in the math book. And there are all kinds of skills that are then related once the kids understand how fractions work. That's instructional design. So yeah, math to me is even easier than reading in the sense of decoding's easy. Sure, sound it out, right? Hear these letters and sounds, sound it out, say it fast. What word is it? Bam, get fluent. Okay, fine. We do that for 2 years. We stop, right? There's a little decoding then takes a back seat to language and comprehension and all of that, right? But math, oh man, math is just it's so systematic, and you can teach kids to do so many things if you understand how it's designed.
Perfect. Yeah. And I just kind of I want to know your main theory, because you've mentioned some of it, like why this was swept under the rug, this project follow through stuff, why direct instruction hasn't sort of taken off and become the default program in most, you even told me that you've seen districts implement it, adopt it, and then get rid of it. Like, what is your main theory of why this is?
Well, in reading, I will tell you this. This is kind of the political. There's a political angle, and it's related to all kinds of things. But one is there is a romantic notion that a romantic notion of education. Everybody's been in school. Everybody thinks they know what to do. There's this romance to what should happen in a classroom. And I should say, by the way, that in direct instruction schools, or people implementing direct instruction, it's not the entire day. It's not that you don't engage in other kinds of fun activities and in engaging activities. But when you have your content, when you have your reading or your writing and your arithmetic, and that those things need to be well designed, right? So number one, people have a romantic notion. They have a romantic notion of what instruction should be, and and they have this romantic notion. And Paul Kirshner said this, and I love this. I want to get the quote right. He said, a poor proxy for learning is engagement. That just because kids are engaged doesn't mean that they're learning. So everybody has this notion of, let's just get kids engaged. Let's just make sure that they love school, and that somehow that hard work of being systematic is just, it's antithetical to that. It's like, that's not the classroom that we want to see. It's not the romantic notion. It's also political. Okay, two aspects to that. One, I don't know how this happened. I don't know when it happened, but Republicans liked phonics. Once Republicans liked phonics, then it was kind of doomed in other classrooms, right? It was kind of like, it was, oh my God, I don't consider myself to be a Republican. I'm not on that side of the aisle. So I can't. In fact, in Emily Hanford's Sold a Story, there was a teacher who said, I can't possibly do anything that George Bush advocated, right? Because he advocated that, so I couldn't do that. It's like, that's what happens, right? So it became very politicized. And what happens when that happens, that somehow the science is just ignored. Nobody wants to think that there is, and all this research, all this on evidence about how kids learn, about what's best, about who's being successful and who's not. People don't. It's like, it's this whole anti-science bias that is pervasive in education until it's your kid, which is another thing that happened in Sold a Story, which was really fascinating. All these reading specialists who then had to change their mind when their own children had difficulty learning how to read, right? I thought that was sort of really interesting. But no, we don't like science in education. We don't want to look at evidence. We want to find reasons for why that can't be. And yet, meanwhile, kids are failing. That part's really hard for me. Meanwhile, you can keep doing this and somehow excuse away that kids are failing. And I think it's because teachers aren't prepared with alternatives. I really, when I get upset about teacher preparation programs that perpetrate the myth that it's a romantic notion, that all learners are different, that there is no science, that, it's just a myth perpetuated. And it's happening in math. And the parallels between reading and math are huge, huge. I mean, everything that's happening in reading could be applied to math. I mean, it's explicit instruction versus student-centered. It's the same argument. It's student-centered versus teacher-directed. And then, then you have to go on. So, yeah.
I mean, this is sort of like a meta myth of all of it is after I've kind of had these discussions, and this podcast is called Progressively Incorrect, on the notion that progressive education not in the political sense, but in the romantic notion, the sort of modern education of what Dewey meant even way back then, of students sort of taking themselves to the material and learning through their own, by teaching themselves and working in a community of open plan classrooms and all of this stuff, that it doesn't work, that it was frustrating to me, that I bought into it. And so that meta myth is sort of that what I'm saying is a straw man. I'm creating a false dichotomy, and really everybody already believes all this stuff anyway. I guess what I have to say, just to wrap that thought up, is that, like, I think if you saw a direct instruction program You saw that fast pace. You saw that instructional design, which is just meticulous about how do you present the example? How do you make sure that there's variety in examples? How do you space, interleave the practice? I think if you put all that together, you would say that that is very different from Genius Hour, exploring project-based, whatever that has sort of, in my view, infected a lot of schools.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm gonna say something else about direct instruction, which is here's a myth it's really interesting. People think that it's really easy to teach because there's a script. So I have the script. All I have to do is read the script. I don't really have to think when I do this. This is the script. Direct instruction is much harder to teach than letting kids go off on their own, because everything is built on something that comes before. So if you don't teach well and bring kids to mastery at a certain part, like on lesson 24, you're going to get to lesson 64 and your kids are going to fall apart. So the responsibility for ensuring that kids are learning is on you. You have to be skilled, and people have to get, I think that coaching is really critical for becoming a good DI teacher. I think it's absolutely, because a good coach is pointing out how students are responding, whether or not they're getting it right, whether or not, it's not easy to teach DI. And I think some people have a hard time doing it because you have to bring kids to mastery. Now, the program will let you do that, and coaches will help you do that. And people who have done this before can help get you there much better, and get your kids to where they need to be. But wow, the myth that it's easy because there's a script there is like way wrong.
And you taking the onus of, responsibility, you taking that on, that might be a shift people need to make. I mean, you set a problem, right? You pose a problem, I guess, and you see how they kind of play around with it. And you see some kids getting frustrated, and you just say, well, maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe it's not developmentally appropriate. When you take on a direct instruction program, that goes out the window. You have to teach them.
Can you place the student in the appropriate program? Are they placed appropriately? And once they are, then it's your responsibility to teach. And I've always thought it was arrogant to think that you watch kids fail in front of you and think that at some point they're going to get it, and to not own that. But I think it's because people don't know alternatives. I think they really weren't taught that in their teacher prep program. They weren't taught that here's the other side to that, and here's how something can be systematic, and here's how you can get your kids to mastery. They don't know that there's something else out there. In fact, I think the science of reading stuff and Emily Hanford's stuff is like, she made it clear that there's something else out there. But I think there's another step to that. And actually, this is what your next question, if you wanted to ask it, it's like, well, what do you do if you don't have a DI program, right? And that's what's really hard. Everybody knows now that everybody knows. It's becoming more and more accepted that phonics is an absolutely essential component of becoming a good reader. You can't all good readers, right, are good decoders. Not all good decoders are good readers. We know that because that has language and background knowledge and all that. But all good readers are good decoders. So how do you know whether the phonics program is any good? Just because somebody says there's phonics. What's the difference between a well-designed phonics program and one that's not? And one of my passions is curriculum evaluation. Teaching teachers. I haven't taught a class where I didn't bring in commercial programs and say, let's look at this together and let's look at what's on the page. Because many programs would stick phonics in there. Oh yeah, we got phonics. And then they give kids anthologies to read where none of was all sight words. None of the phonics made any sense. They couldn't apply any of it. Or they had some little decodable text and then they had an anthology. No. If you need the decodable text, then you can't read the anthology. If you can read the anthology, you don't need the decodable text. Right. So it's there's another step to all of this. Right. And that is, what does well-designed instruction look like? How do you evaluate programs? And so that you choose the program that requires the least modification, that has some of the real substantial, important components in there. And then so that teachers can, if they have to modify something, they modify it less. So, I advocate using commercially designed direct instruction programs, just so you don't have to do that much modification. You might have to do some. There are some programs that are better than others. There's some direct instruction programs that need revision that McGraw-Hill is revising. I think they're in the process of revising corrective reading. I know that corrective math is on the list, but that corrective math program, it's very limited. It's very small, but what it teaches well. If you have kids who can't compute, then there's an addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, remedial kind of program. And the fractions is absolutely fantastic. A fractions program, fractions, percents, and decimals, ratios and equations. Those are modules that if you added that to your teaching, oh my goodness, the kids, because I know how fractions are taught in most programs, so you kind of find programs if you are teaching beginning reading and you don't have access to a good reading program. It's a huge seller on Amazon. Teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons. It's fast. It's too fast for a whole bunch of kids, but it's basically a condensed version of Reading Mastery 1, direct instruction program, with Reading Mastery 2. It's condensed versions. You'll have to practice more. You'll have to go faster, slower on some, but it's $18. And you could teach young kids how to decode with that, using a systematic approach. There's some programs out there. They're the books. The books are outrageously expensive and shouldn't be that expensive, but the direct instruction reading book and the direct instruction math book that have strategies in them so that you can add strategies to certain things, but you have to know how to do that. It's very, very hard to figure out what to do when you don't have a well-designed program. You get yourself on a curriculum evaluation committee. The next program that we're going to adopt, and you figure out, you write grants to get more money, to get supplementary programs. You do what you can to get some tools that will allow your teachers to be successful with kids. And it's a hard question to answer when you don't have those programs. And then when you do have them, you need to get support in how to implement them well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems tough, but the stars can align, I think. You can be in a district in which they get the right people to evaluate the materials, and then they bring in the people that have the right mind to implement them correctly. I just see so much, and I'm sure you've seen this your whole career, where like we have a math program here. The first thing you're supposed to do, I think, is investigate, and the next thing you're supposed to do is explore or something, and the last thing you do is like apply. And I'm going, where's the modeling? Where's the feedback?
Where's the strategy?
Yeah,
where's the strategy? What am I supposed to? What steps am I supposed to take? And if I invent those steps, are those steps going to help me with the next kind of problem? I mean, why would I invest all this time in this that's not going to work over there? That this strategy that works over here isn't going to work over here. It only works for this type of problem. And who understands that the universe of problems for which a strategy works, right? Nobody understands that. There is a very fun video on YouTube. There are a couple of videos on YouTube, and there's a very fun one of Engelmann teaching math to the very first group of kids he ever worked with in 1964, maybe 66. I can't remember. And it's just a showing off video, and he just shows off what they can do. And when I show that to students, what I have to say is, you have to keep track of all these things that these kids are doing. And then you have to understand that they've only had a year, maybe sometimes 2 years of instruction, 20 minutes a day, because these are little kids. There's no way they could have memorized all that. That has to be about relationships. If you know this, then you know this. If you can do this, then you can do this. Here's the relationship between this and this. The difference between implementing an addition strategy and facts. Math facts are different from implementing addition strategies and column addition and all of that. There are two different chapters in our book. There's a math facts chapter, and there's an addition chapter, and they're not the same. And so yeah, it's really hard, and sometimes they do align, and sometimes people kind of do wake up. But the bottom line has to be your kid performance. So if kids keep failing and failing and failing and failing, what are we doing to move that needle? I mean, that's what has to be at the heart of all of it. is what you're doing working? And if it's not working, then why keep doing it?
Well, Dr. Stein, I love this talk. Just kind of recap. We talked about project follow through, which really gave kind of that big longitudinal evidence for direct instruction.
And it's when the programs were written. Those programs were sort of written and developed through project follow through.
Right. And this evidence hasn't been overturned. In fact, it's been strengthened over the years that direct instruction programs work. However, we have to be, we have to take into account that there are just a lot of there are a lot of people that don't really necessarily want these programs for like so many reasons, and which we'll keep exploring on this podcast in the future, I guess. What is next for you in terms of your career?
Well, I am retired from the university, but I'm not totally retired. So I work with some researchers at the American Institutes of Research office in Seattle, and I consult with them on teacher preparation issues, and I'm working with the state of Pennsylvania on some of these teacher preparation issues. I really still have a passion for curriculum evaluation, and really would like to see some things happen in math. I don't know what that means for me, but I'd like to participate in that. I'd like to, especially the math. It's really interesting, and curriculum evaluation issues, are pertinent to both reading and to math. Like how do you know what a good program looks like, right? How do you choose among the choices that you have? So I'm not sure. I retired right before the pandemic, so that kind of sort of startled me into like, okay, what next? But I'm keeping busy, and I'm still as passionate as ever. I sent a link to the National Institute for Direct Instruction, NIFTY. It's in Eugene, Oregon. I still present at their conference. They have a conference every year in July, a national conference. So I present on research. I think I'm going to be presenting possibly on the science of reading. So I'm still involved, I guess I should say.
And I really wish I had your class instead of the inquiry math class I got. But I'm really thankful for, I tell people this, like, it was just one of those moments where everything just didn't sit right with the class, because you were telling us about something we hadn't been hearing, which is that, hey, there's all this evidence around direct instruction. You haven't heard about it, have you? Right? So,
well, Zach, I have to tell you a funny story. The very first class I took at Oregon, I didn't know much about direct instruction, and I took the course from Doug Carnine, who was Engelmann and Becker were the two directors of follow through, and Wes was a faculty member. So was Engelmann, a faculty member. Wes was a prominent professional and academic. And I took Doug Carnine's class in reading. And after having several reading classes as an undergraduate, here I am in graduate school. And in one of his first classes, he says, it's really not a good idea to teach the letter sound correspondences B and D together, because they confuse kids. They look alike and they sound alike. So you really should separate them. That was it for me. That was like, yeah. Why would you introduce things that kids are going to confuse all the time? Why would you introduce them? A, B, C, D. Why would you do that in that order? And that was it. That first class was, for me, it was like, whoa, that makes sense. Oh, it makes sense to do that. Oh yeah, it makes sense to do that. And it was like also logical and appealing and doable, and you could put your hands on it and you could learn it. It was like, yeah, I got hooked with really, maybe B and D shouldn't be taught together. It's like, yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Marcy Stein from the University of Washington, Tacoma. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.